Russia's been leaning hard on a new game plan for 2025. Since its ground attacks have been losing steam, it's shifted focus to the skies, sending waves of missiles and drones across Ukraine like never before. But by the end of September, the tables turned. Ukraine stopped just defending and went on the offensive. And when they hit back, they didn't hold back. On September 29th, Ukraine launched a strike that plunged parts of Russia's border city Belgorod into darkness. Entire neighborhoods were left without power after long-range weapons, possibly ones Ukraine didn't even make itself, smashed two of the city's lifelines, its thermal power plant and an electrical substation. Knock those out, and you don't just dim the lights, you disrupt water supplies, hospital systems, and basic city services. The blackout was confirmed not just by reporters but also by Belgorod's own governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov. He admitted that the strike left hospitals and police stations running on backup generators and even caused water shortages in some areas. Still, his statement wasn't just about facts. It was designed to pull at emotions. He wanted people to picture civilians struggling in the dark, not military infrastructure being destroyed. This is where things get interesting. Usually, when Ukraine's long-range drones or missiles manage to land inside Russia, officials brush it off, deny the damage, or call it just another drone crash. But not this time. Why? Because Russian civilians felt the impact directly, even if no one was killed or injured. That detail gave Moscow a chance to twist the story, to frame Ukraine as the villain. Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs even keeps an online list of what it calls terrorist crimes by Kyiv. The Belgorod strike will almost certainly be added there. The logic is simple but one-sided. Russia can fire on Ukrainian cities with bombs, drones, and missiles. But the moment Ukraine hits back, and especially if civilians on Russian soil lose power or water, it's painted as an act of terrorism. Everyone outside of Russia can see what's going on here. It's not about the blackout. It's about shaping the story of the war, spinning Ukraine's retaliation into propaganda fuel. Now, here's the part Russia doesn't want people talking about. Belgorod wasn't some random target. Ukraine didn't just pick a spot on the map and fire. The city is only a short drive from the Ukrainian border, and it's been used as a launching pad for Russia's own attacks. Tanks, troops, and missiles have all funneled through Belgorod at different points in the war. Knocking out its power grid wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. Think about it. If your enemy is using a city as a staging ground, and you can take out the very systems that keep that city running, you've just made it a lot harder for them to operate. No electricity means disrupted communications, slowed down logistics, and constant headaches for the military trying to coordinate strikes from there. And Ukraine's timing wasn't accidental either. This strike came after weeks of Russia hammering Ukrainian cities with drones, waves of them, sometimes dozens in a single night. Kyiv wanted to show that it could hit back, that it wasn't helpless under the rain of Russian missiles. And more importantly, it wanted to send a message. If you keep attacking us, we can reach into your backyard too. The blackout in Belgorod might not have caused casualties, but it shook the sense of safety for ordinary Russians living near the border. Up until now, many of them could convince themselves the war was happening over there in Ukraine. Suddenly, the war was at their doorstep. Sirens, explosions, and days without reliable power. For Ukraine, that was the point. This wasn't just about taking out power stations. It was psychological warfare. It reminded Russian civilians that supporting the war comes with a cost, and that cost can land right in their living rooms. So what exactly did Ukraine hit in Belgorod? Because it definitely wasn't apartment blocks or schools. According to reports, the target was a massive energy hub known as TES-4, a power station responsible for keeping the lights on in a huge chunk of the city. Geo-located videos confirmed the strike, showing at least 5 direct hits tearing through the facility. The blasts didn't just scorch the outer walls, they wrecked fuel storage tanks, supply lines, turbines, and the electrical substation tied to it. In other words, Ukraine didn't go after civilians. It went after the very machinery that powered Belgorod. This wasn't just any old power plant either. TES-4 had been rebuilt back in 2007 with updated technology, including a modern gas turbine capable of pumping out enough heat and electricity to cover the central and northern districts of Belgorod. That's more than a third of the city's total energy needs gone in an instant. Imagine if one strike knocked out every third light switch and radiator in your town. That's the scale of what we're talking about. Footage of the attack quickly started spreading online. Canal 13's YouTube channel showed the sky above Belgorod filled with thick, black smoke pouring from the burning plant. Flames roared inside the building, impossible to hide, and Russia itself had to admit the fires were caused by Ukraine's strike. More proof came from Astra, a Telegram channel that posted screenshots of outage maps and reports of people struggling without power or water. It showed in real time just how many homes were affected. By then, it was clear. This wasn't a strike Russia could sweep under the rug. Too many people felt the impact directly, and too many cameras were rolling. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. This didn't look like the work of Ukraine's standard drones. The destruction was on a bigger scale, raising questions about whether Ukraine had pulled something else out of its arsenal, a weapon it hasn't had the chance to use in quite a while. And that mystery is what has everyone paying close attention. Ukraine's strike on Belgorod wasn't some random act. It was a response, sharp, deliberate, and meant to land right on Putin's desk. The message couldn't have been clearer. If you keep blasting our cities, we'll make sure yours feel the heat too. Just hours before Ukraine launched its own attack, Russia had unleashed yet another massive overnight barrage. This wasn't a handful of missiles. It was a swarm. According to reports, the assault dragged on for nearly 12 hours, pounding Ukrainian regions with almost 500 drones and more than 40 missiles. Think about that. Hundreds of explosive machines filling the skies, wave after wave, all in a single night. The toll was brutal. At least 4 people were killed, one of them a 12-year-old girl. Over 70 others were injured in Kyiv, Zaporizhzhia, and surrounding areas. Apartment blocks and cars were shredded. A 5-story building partially collapsed. By dawn, nearly 20 different sites lay in ruins across the capital. 7 districts of Kyiv alone reported damage. Russia had thrown a huge amount of firepower into the attack, using strategic bombers to launch from multiple points. At 1:45 a.m., 5 Tu-95 bombers took off from Olenya airfield way up in Murmansk. Minutes later, MiG-31K bombers followed, triggering air raid sirens across Ukraine. More Tu-95s launched from Engels Air Base farther south, making it clear that Russia was hitting from as many angles as possible. And they didn't stop at Kyiv. Zaporizhzhia, Sumy, and Khmelnytsky were also hammered. In every case, some missiles and drones managed to slip through Ukraine's defenses, landing on residential buildings and vehicles instead of just military targets. Families woke up to explosions tearing through their neighborhoods. Cars were flattened. Streets were left in smoking wreckage. So when Ukraine struck Belgorod's power grid just hours later, it wasn't out of nowhere. It was a pointed retaliation for a night that had left Ukrainian civilians bloodied, homeless, and grieving. The scale of Russia's September 28th assault was staggering. It wasn't just missiles. It was an entire arsenal unleashed at once. Caliber Ka-101 and Ka-55 cruise missiles streaked across the sky, while hundreds of drones swarmed in. Many of these drones were Duran and Shahed types, the same models Russia has leaned on heavily throughout the war. Some were even decoys, meant to confuse Ukraine's defenses before the real strikes hit. But when you compare Russia's attacks to Ukraine's, the difference is night and day. Ukraine's strike on Belgorod hit a thermal power plant, clearly a military target, especially since Belgorod sits right on the border and serves as a staging ground for Russian operations. No civilians were reported hurt. If they had been, Russia would have blasted the news everywhere to fuel its "Ukraine is a terrorist" story. Meanwhile, Russia's own strike that same night told a completely different tale. It killed civilians, 4 people, including a 12-year-old girl, and left more than 70 others wounded. The attack was indiscriminate, hammering residential buildings, vehicles, and entire city blocks. For Ukrainians, this wasn't unusual. It was just the latest in a long list of civilian massacres carried out since the invasion began. The numbers paint a grim picture. According to UN data compiled by Statista, by July 31, 2025, Russia's war had already killed 13,883 civilians and injured 35,548 more. Among the dead were 726 children. Another 2,234 children were among the wounded. And now, after the September 28th strike, those numbers have climbed even higher. This is the heart of the contrast. Russia fires off missiles and drones in ways designed to terrorize, leveling homes and scattering families. Ukraine, on the other hand, aims carefully. Dangerous, yes, but focused on military infrastructure and systems that weaken Putin's war machine. That precision is exactly why Ukraine's actions can't honestly be called terrorism, no matter how many times Moscow tries to twist the narrative. The scale of Russia's September 28th assault was staggering. It wasn't just missiles. It was an entire arsenal unleashed at once. Caliber, Kh-101, and Ka-55 cruise missiles streaked across the sky while hundreds of drones swarmed in. Many of these drones were Garan and Shahed types, the same models Russia has leaned on heavily throughout the war. Some were even decoys, meant to confuse Ukraine's defenses before the real strikes hit. But when you compare Russia's attacks to Ukraine's, the difference is night and day. Ukraine's strike on Belgorod hit a thermal power plant, clearly a military target, especially since Belgorod sits right on the border and serves as a staging ground for Russian operations. No civilians were reported hurt. If they had been, Russia would have blasted the news everywhere to fuel its "Ukraine is a terrorist" story. Meanwhile, Russia's own strike that same night told a completely different tale. It killed civilians, 4 people, including a 12-year-old girl, and left more than 70 others wounded. The attack was indiscriminate, hammering residential buildings, vehicles, and entire city blocks. For Ukrainians, this wasn't unusual. It was just the latest in a long list of civilian massacres carried out since the invasion began. The numbers paint a grim picture. According to UN data compiled by Statista, by July 31, 2025, Russia's war had already killed 13,883 civilians and injured 35,548 more. Among the dead were 726 children. Another 2,234 children were among the wounded. And now, after the September 28th strike, those numbers have climbed even higher. This is the heart of the contrast. Russia fires off missiles and drones in ways designed to terrorize, leveling homes and scattering families. Ukraine, on the other hand, aims carefully. Dangerous, yes, but focused on military infrastructure and systems that weaken Putin's war machine. That precision is exactly why Ukraine's actions can't honestly be called terrorism, no matter how many times Moscow tries to twist the narrative. Russia loves to throw around the word terrorist when talking about Ukraine, but the irony is hard to miss. Moscow's missiles and drones have ripped through apartment buildings, hospitals, and schools, leaving behind tens of thousands of civilian casualties. That's real terror. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had made it crystal clear he wasn't going to let that slide. Just one day before Russia's massive September 28th barrage, Zelensky stood in front of reporters in Kyiv and delivered a warning straight at the Kremlin. If they threaten blackouts in the capital of Ukraine, then they should know there will be a blackout in the capital of Russia. He didn't get Moscow this time. Instead, it was Belgorod that went dark. But the symbolism still carried weight. The message was clear. If Russia can make Ukrainian cities suffer, Ukraine can flip the switch on Russian cities too. And here's the detail that changes everything. Ukraine didn't rely on the same drones it had used to torch oil refineries all summer long. Those drones are effective at starting fires and causing shutdowns, but they don't have the raw punch to take down an entire power plant. For Belgorod, Ukraine reached for something heavier: missiles. But not just any missiles, American ones. Analysts say video footage and photos of the strikes point to the US-made M31 GMLRS, also known as a guided multiple launch rocket system. Don't let the name fool you. Yes, it's technically an artillery rocket, but in practice it acts like a precision missile. It can fly up to 100 miles, hit its target with GPS-guided accuracy, and deliver a warhead weighing about 200 pounds of pure explosive force.
If you've made it this far into the video, it means you're enjoying what we do here at Euro Bulletin. Take a second to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more updates and insights from Europe and its partners. Let's dive in more into the subject.
Ukraine has the perfect tools to launch them too. about 40 HIMARS systems as of May 2025, plus several M270 rocket launchers. With that kind of hardware, Belgorod was well within range. Kursk would be too, if Ukraine decided to make that the next target. Now, on paper, none of this should be shocking. Everyone knows Ukraine has US-made weapons, and back in November 2024, President Joe Biden had already given Kyiv the green light to use them, at least in a limited way, against Russian territory. But here's the twist. Biden isn't in office anymore. Donald Trump is. And that changes the entire equation. Under Donald Trump, a small but critical shift happened that quietly changed how Ukraine could fight. It didn't make big headlines at first, but it had huge consequences. Back in August, the Wall Street Journal broke the story. For months, the US had been blocking Ukraine from firing American-made weapons into Russian territory. It wasn't a blanket ban, it was a bureaucratic chokehold. Every single time Ukraine wanted to use a US missile or bomb across the border, it had to run the request through an approval system. The final decision rested with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. And for months, his answer was almost always the same. No. That's why, throughout the first half of 2025, there were no reports of US-made ATACMS or M31 rockets striking inside Russia. Ukraine's arsenal was technically stocked, but Washington had tied its hands. Kyiv was left to rely mostly on homegrown drones and smaller munitions. This is what makes the Belgorod strike such a big deal. It wasn't just a powerful attack. It was proof that the rules had changed. American missiles had been used, which could only mean one thing. Washington had quietly given the green light again. Hints of this shift surfaced just before the attack. On September 26th, The Independent reported that President Trump told Volodymyr Zelensky he was open to loosening restrictions. The two had spoken days earlier at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, where Trump publicly blasted Putin's bad leadership. Behind closed doors, that criticism turned into policy. According to the report, Zelensky pushed hard. He asked Trump to lift the block on ATACMS missiles, long-range precision weapons Ukraine had been itching to use against Russia. And he didn't stop there. He also floated the idea of getting Tomahawk cruise missiles from the US, the kind with ranges stretching up to 1,500 miles. If those ever made it into Ukrainian hands, nearly every major Russian city would suddenly be within reach. Belgorod, then, wasn't just payback. It was a signal, a demonstration of what Ukraine could do now that Washington's leash had slackened. The Independent reported that Washington is still weighing Ukraine's request for Tomahawk cruise missiles. Nothing is final yet, but the very fact that it's being considered has already rattled Moscow. What we do know, thanks to Belgorod, is that Ukraine now has clearance to use the M31 rockets inside Russia. That single strike was proof. Kyiv fired, and Washington didn't stop it. For Ukraine, the timing was perfect. Using American rockets to hit Belgorod just hours after Russia's largest air assault of the year sent a double message: revenge for Putin's bombardment, and a signal that US backing is once again behind Ukraine's long-range punch. Russia, as expected, went into full panic mode. The idea of Tomahawks heading to Ukraine set off a frenzy among the Kremlin's propagandists. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's ever-loyal spokesman, started firing off questions laced with accusations. Who will really launch these missiles? Ukrainians or American soldiers? Who decides where they're aimed, the US or Ukraine? His meaning was obvious. If Tomahawks are used, Russia will claim it's not Ukraine fighting, but America itself. Others were less subtle. Andrei Kartapolov, head of Russia's Defense Committee, warned that if US personnel were even suspected of helping Ukraine use Tomahawks, America itself would become a target. And no one will protect them, he threatened. Not Trump, not Kellogg, not anyone. Peskov added fuel to the fire by calling the possibility of Tomahawks a dangerous escalation, insisting Russia would need to make a deep analysis of American involvement. Translation: the Kremlin is nervous, very nervous, and they have good reason. Tomahawks can reach up to 1,500 miles, plenty of range for Ukraine to strike directly into Moscow or any other major Russian hub. With that kind of reach, Zelensky could deliver on the warning he made just days earlier about bringing blackouts to Russia's capital. For now, Belgorod has shown Russia what Ukraine can do with M31s. But the looming question is bigger. What happens if Washington really does hand over Tomahawks? Because there's only one purpose for a weapon like that: deep strategic strikes into the Russian heartland. Ukraine knows it, Washington knows it, and Moscow knows it better than anyone. Tomahawks in Ukrainian hands would change the game completely. These missiles could tear into critical sites deep inside Russia, places that previous Ukrainian drones already exposed as weakly defended from the air. The Belgorod blackout alone was painful for Russia, but the strike revealed something bigger. America is shifting. The restrictions that once tied Ukraine's hands are loosening. The US, under Trump, is edging toward a full policy reversal that Putin never expected. This is where Trump himself comes into the picture. Since stepping back into the Oval Office, he's made no secret of his desire to bring the war to some kind of halt, whether through peace talks or a ceasefire. He's even gotten close a few times. But every time negotiations start to look possible, Putin orders more missile swarms, more drone attacks, more ground offensives. To Trump, it's looked like a con, empty promises of peace while Ukraine keeps burning. That frustration has been boiling for months. On September 12th, Reuters captured the moment Trump finally admitted it out loud during a Fox News interview. When asked about Putin, he said, "Yeah, it's sort of running out, and running out fast." At the time, Trump hinted at new sanctions, economic weapons designed to squeeze Russia's finances. But within weeks, the conversation had escalated from sanctions to missiles. Now, rumors of Tomahawks being shipped to Ukraine and evidence of American rockets slamming into Belgorod suggest Trump's patience has officially snapped. Putin kept poking, and now the US is giving Ukraine the green light to poke back, harder. The fires burning in Belgorod are just the first sign. For Putin, the fall of 2025 is shaping up to be one long season of bad news. Internationally, Ukraine is proving it can hit Russia where it hurts. At home, cracks are spreading through the foundations of the empire Putin built around himself. And as the chaos grows, the man who once looked untouchable is watching the walls start to close in. So here we are. Ukraine striking deep into Russia with American rockets, Washington signaling a shift, and Putin's grip looking shakier than ever. Belgorod was more than a blackout. It was a warning flare, a message that the war no longer stays neatly on one side of the border. But where does it all go from here? If the US really hands over Tomahawks, how will Russia respond to weapons that can reach its heartland? Will Putin gamble on escalating further, or is this the beginning of his unraveling? And if Trump has finally lost patience, what new tools might Washington unleash to tighten the pressure even more? The battlefield is changing, the alliances are shifting, and the questions only get sharper. What happens when Ukraine's strikes reach deeper into Russia than ever before? And what will the world look like if Putin's empire finally cracks under the weight of the war he started?